and not for anything else, not necessarily to serve us Diet Cokes or something. It really was spectacular, wasn't it, the evacuation?
It was, and let me say, first of all, thank God that nobody was killed in that accident. It would have been very easy for that accident to be much, much worse and for lives to have been lost. And watching that footage, it is harrowing. All of us have landed on flights like that, and to imagine going through the terror of it flipping upside down and seeing the flight attendants and the pilots and just the ground crew, everyone stepping in, putting the fire out, rescuing those people. Our prayers are with the 21 who are injured. We're grateful that 19 of them are out of the hospital already. And I will say it raises broader questions about air traffic and air safety. Look, just a couple of weeks ago, we saw the horrific accident outside Ronald Reagan National Airport that took the lives of 67 souls. Just last week, I went and toured the wreckage of that American Airlines plane and of that Black Hawk helicopter. Truly a horrific accident. I will say with both of these accidents, the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, is conducting an investigation, and I have worked very closely with the NTSB for a long time. They have very serious professionals. They recreate exactly what happened. They examine the evidence, and we need to know precisely what caused the accident in Toronto and precisely what caused the accident outside D.C.
Well, I was doing a little research, and I see that back in December, you were calling or making statements that we need to modernize our airlines, our airports, our system, FAA system. So now, of course, I'm paying a lot of attention to what you said. What's the modernization that we so desperately need?
Well, listen, when it comes to air traffic control in the United States, we really are using 1950s technology. It is literally radar and little slips of paper that the air traffic controllers are using, and they're monitoring where the planes are. With respect to the accident that happened at Reagan Airport, it is very possible that updated technology using GPS, using precise locations, would have prevented that accident. I'll tell you, it is also troubling in that it appears right now that the Army's Black Hawk helicopter had a technology called ATSB out, which is advanced technology to give the precise location of the helicopter. The Army had that turned off, and there's an exception in the FAA's rules. Generally, commercial aircraft are required to have ATSB out, but the Army has an exception to that. And I got to tell you, for the Senate Commerce Committee, I expect we're going to revisit that. In this case, the Black Hawk helicopter was not on some deeply classified national security flight, but it was rather a routine training mission. And I can see no good reason why in a routine training mission you would not have ATSB out, turned on. That also could have prevented that accident. All of that being said, Greta, with respect to both of these accidents, we need to allow the NTSB to conduct this investigation, to look at the evidence and to make a determination, not jumping to conclusions, but based on what actually caused the accidents.
Well, the ATSB being out on that Black Hawk helicopter here at the end of January at Reagan Airport was human error. It wasn't a lack of modernization. I mean, we had the technology. Would you agree on that? I mean, that was just that someone decided not to use it.
Well, it's actually, some of it is human error, but some of it is policy. So the military, there is an exception to the requirement of ATSB out for military flights, law enforcement flights, and emergency medical flights. And it appears the Army has a routine policy of turning ATSB out off because of that exception. I think that routine policy needs to be revisited, and this is a point that I've made to the FAA, to the NTSB, and to the Pentagon, that we need to look at that. I think beyond that, though, modernizing air traffic control technology would have given the air traffic controller a greater ability to see precisely where the plane was and the Black Hawk helicopter was. Based on a preliminary review, The NTSB is going to make a determination as to what mistakes led to this accident. There was at least one, if not multiple, egregious mistakes. If you look at the back and forth with the air traffic controller and the pilots of both the plane and the helicopter in D.C., at one point the air traffic controller asked the helicopter pilot, "Do you see the regional jet?" And the answer is, "Yes, I see it. I have visual confirmation." The air traffic controller did not specify which jet. This is a busy airport with lots of jets. The natural inference is the helicopter pilot was looking at a different jet rather than the one that was on final approach. Advanced technology might well have prevented this. We'll have more when we have the NTSB report. But we also need to assess, are there changes in policy? One of the things we know is the air traffic control at Reagan, they used to have two air traffic controllers, one controlling jet traffic, one controlling helicopter traffic. They had sent one of those two home shortly before this accident, so there was one controller monitoring both. Obviously, that was not enough, and so we need to follow the evidence and make whatever changes are necessary to prevent these kind of disastrous accidents. With respect to the Toronto accident, it's still very early. We know there were high winds. We know that there was snow on the runway, but we need to assess what exactly caused it. Was it a mechanical failure? Was it a pilot error? Was it something else? And at this point, I would say it's too early to tell, and I think it's irresponsible to assume a conclusion rather than looking to the evidence and making a determination exactly what happened.
Are we sort of leading the world in air traffic control modernization, or are we behind? Because, there's so many flights coming in from overseas. We have flights going out overseas. We have Americans traveling all over the world.
Look, we are way behind, and I will say one of the consequences immediately after the accident that happened at Reagan Airport, one of the things Elon Musk said he was going to lean in his new responsibility to try to help the FAA modernize their technology. And I got to say, Greta, it's an amazing thing. Look, you and I have talked before about Trump derangement syndrome, how there are people in Washington and across the country, both Democrats and many in the corporate media, who just have lost their minds about Donald Trump. Well, I think there is a related mental illness we're now seeing that I call Elon derangement syndrome. People have just decided that Elon Musk is the devil. I had reporters asking me, well, isn't it horrible that Elon Musk is going to help with modernization of our air traffic control? And I started laughing and saying, wait a second, you have one of the greatest technology CEOs in the history of the world who is volunteering his time free of charge to help update our technology, and somehow you think that's a bad thing?
Senator Ted Cruz from the great state of Texas. Thank you, sir. Today in Saudi Arabia, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff met with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Russian President Vladimir Putin's aide Yuri Ushakov. This high-stakes meeting hoping to soothe the tense relationship between Russia and the United States. But improving relations with our Russian foe was not the only topic. They also discussed Russia and Ukraine's war. And now, after the meeting between the United States and Russia, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has unexpectedly postponed his planned trip to Saudi Arabia until March 10th. Zelensky was supposed to travel to Saudi Arabia tomorrow. Foreign correspondent Zach Anders is in central Ukraine, where it's very cold. He joins us with the latest. Zach?
Good evening, Greta. Following these talks in Saudi Arabia, we've been under constant air alert throughout the day. We have received reports in the south and the Odessa region of civilian casualties as a result of a large-scale air attack. We've right now just received some alerts and texts from sources that there are Iranian-made Shahed drones heading our direction as Kyiv is under ballistic missile threat. We hear the air defense is working within the last hour as well. Kyiv more than 200 miles away from the nearest edge of the front lines. So while these talks may have netted some marginal gains today, the war continues. Now, both nations' foreign dignitaries holding their own press conferences after the sit-down in Saudi earlier today. Secretary of State Marco Rubio signaling the talks were positive, while Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov left the talks publicly stating Russia's red lines, claiming any NATO troops in Ukraine is non-negotiable, even going further, saying, quote, any appearance of armed forces under some other flag does not change anything. It is, of course, completely unacceptable. Meanwhile, in Ankara, Turkey, Ukraine's President Zelensky getting a major boost from a close partner to Russia through this war. Turkey's President Erdogan stating Ukraine's territorial integrity and independence is a, quote, indispensable condition for peace. And back your direction in Washington, President Trump speaking not long ago on the status of these talks and the pursuit of peace. Take a listen.
I'm looking at people that are being killed, and they're Russian and Ukrainian people, but they're people. Doesn't matter where they're from on the whole planet. And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well.
And as a direct result of these talks in Saudi, both the U.S. and Russia stating they will fully staff their embassies in Washington and Moscow going forward. This while, as you mentioned, President Zelensky has now canceled his pre-scheduled trip to Saudi Arabia. He was set to arrive late tomorrow. And Greta, after these talks in Saudi, Lavrov has claimed that the U.S. asked the Russian Federation to stop targeting civilian electrical infrastructure in Ukraine, with Lavrov replying in the press conference that Russia has never targeted electrical infrastructure throughout the country. That is, of course, not supported by any available evidence. And throughout this region, we're experiencing blackouts here as well as a result of these continued drone and missile attacks on the power stations, on the substations. I've seen over the course of the last 3 years reporting from this war, direct hits on some of these power stations and them burning in the summertime, in the wintertime. It hasn't mattered. They have targeted very clearly the electric infrastructure and in large part tried to break the spirit, the will of the Ukrainian fight to keep going, plunging them into the cold. No power in some areas of Ukraine tonight as it dips below 10 degrees. Greta?
Zach Anders, thank you very much, reporting live from Ukraine. Now time for some historic trivia. 16 years ago, the United States and Russia were at a loggerhead. You could feel the international tension much like now. So on March 6, 2009, then President Barack Obama sent then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to Geneva, Switzerland to meet with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Now, he's the same foreign minister that current Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with today in Saudi Arabia. The goal of that 2009 meeting, much like today's meeting, it was to reset U.S.-Russia relations. During that 2009 meeting, Clinton emphasized the historic significance of the reset between the two nations, and she gifted Lavrov a red button with what she thought had the word reset on it. But alas, that was not the case.
Which represents what President Obama and Vice President Biden and I have been saying. And that is, we want to reset our relationship. And so we will do it together.
Thank you very much.
You are very welcome. We worked hard to get the right Russian word. Do you think we got it?
You get it wrong.
I got it wrong.
It should be перезагрузка. And this says перегрузка, which means overcheck.
Well, we won't let you do that to us, I promise.
Okay, thank you very much.
Retired Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army, retired Black Hawk helicopter pilot Darren Gaub joins me. Good evening, sir. And 2009, the Obama administration tried to reset with Russia. That didn't work. Now we hear tonight from my colleague in Ukraine that the Iranian drones are civilian casualties, that there are alerts going off in Kyiv, which is 200 miles from the border. And then you have Lavrov, the same foreign minister, saying in Saudi Arabia that the red line is no NATO troops in Ukraine, but there aren't any NATO troops in Ukraine. So their red line is, Russia's the aggressor.
Yeah, Greta, to me, this just is living history over and over again. And this reset has happened a couple times, but it started, frankly, after the fall of the Soviet Union and the continued creeping eastward of NATO, despite promises that NATO wouldn't do that. Clinton was one of the guys who led that effort, pushing it further and further eastward and creating a scenario in Moscow's mind that we were an offensive group. NATO is an offensive organization that would continue to encroach on what was considered to be the sphere of influence of the former Soviet Union, now Russia, Commonwealth of Independent States. And on through that point in history that you just highlighted to today, we're going to go back to the table again with Russia, with a new president, and say, listen, all that's water under the bridge now. We can reset this relationship and we can do positive things amongst ourselves, to include potentially bringing Russia in some way into the European sphere of influence where they've wanted to be for a long time. If that happens, you're going to see something historic change.
Yeah, I agree, but they have. Is it the fact that they have 1,700 deployed nuclear warheads that has Russia's foot on our throat, that we're willing to, quote, keep resetting when they are doing terrible atrocities inside Ukraine, have been for 3 years, kidnapping children, killing civilians, rape, using rape as a weapon and everything, and now we're sitting down in Saudi Arabia. I get it. I want peace. I want the killings to stop. But are we fooling ourselves? Because so far, it seems like, we're not winning this. We're not winning this.
Well, that remains to be seen. I think it's worth sitting down and having the talk. This reminds me of when Reagan met with Gorbachev in Iceland, and on through time. You're going to sit down with whoever you have to sit across the table and do the best you can in the situation you have. I don't think anybody's denying what Putin has done, that war is terrible, that Russia was the aggressor here, and that there have been atrocities that have been committed, and those must all be accounted for the best way we can. But to not sit down is just...
So what do we give them? I mean, I agree with you. Talking's great. Roosevelt talked to Stalin, who killed 20 million people in World War II. I get that. But what can we offer Russia so they stop killing Ukrainians?
Well, the biggest thing that's on the table right now, as far as Putin is concerned, which is the mind I try to be in and understand the most, is that we do not offer to push Ukraine into a NATO status. If you take that off,
they're not there. But that's even sort of mythical, because they've said, NATO apparently is off the table. They are not members of NATO. Turkey's never going to let Ukraine into NATO. So we're bargaining about something that doesn't seem very realistic to me.
Well, I think Putin wanted to hear it very clearly that we would not push for them to be in NATO, because that's what Ukraine wants. At least that's what Zelensky wants. And so if they're going to keep pushing that, we've got to make sure we just eliminate it altogether as a topic of conversation and move forward from there as if they're never going to be, or if they were, they wouldn't be for another 10 or 20 years when they even come close to meeting the conditions to be part of it. That's what I'm doing, is I'm looking at it from Putin's angle, saying they cannot be part of NATO. That's what their concern has been for decades, is an encroaching Europe on Russia as a threat to them. Whether we agree with it or not, doesn't matter. That's how they are seeing it.
Well, I'm thrilled that President Trump's administration is sitting people down at the table, because I think that's really important, and I'm hoping for the best, because that's better than doing nothing. But it is really a heavy lift. Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gauld, thank you very much for joining me, sir.
Thanks, Chris.
This is a stunning turn of events. Mexico has granted U.S. Special Forces entry into Mexico to take on the cartels. Members of the Green Berets are now in Mexico. They will be there through the end of March in their mission to train the Mexican Navy in conventional and non-conventional combat. It is part of a deal reached between President Trump and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. Border correspondent Jason Jones joins me. Jason?
Oh, Greta, it's good to be with you. But look, these 11 Green Berets going down to Mexico to work side by side with the Mexican Marines, that's a good thing. This is all about collaboration. In the last 6 years under the AMLO administration, all of the relationships were destroyed between the U.S. government and the Mexican government. And what we saw from going back as far as the Calderon and the Nieto administration, you saw a real cohesion as the U.S. government was trying to do what they could to work with the Mexican government to go after the Los Zetas, which spawned into the hyper-violence you see across Mexico today. So the movement of troops, we're also seeing the Central Intelligence Agency now going down there as well. All of that is about reforging relationships, rebuilding the capability so that way they can launch operations in Mexico. Look, at the end of the day, here's the deal. We have the foreign terrorism designation. The policy of the Trump administration is very clear. It is no longer about dismantling and disrupting these cartels. It is about total elimination. And so you're seeing that capacity being built up in Mexico, just as we're seeing it along our southwest border.
Jason, have you seen any reaction? I mean, we've seen since the Trump administration, there are less people trying to come across the border. But have you seen any sort of? Is there any measurable way to have it, whether we can tell whether the cartels are changing strategy or they're feeling this?
That's a great question. That's the next real tripwire to watch for. Look, they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars with the numbers of people who are crossing into the country now dropping to historic lows. I mean, what was it, day before yesterday? 229 people at the southwest border after we were over 10,000 per day at the southwest border. So, look, they're losing a lot of money. That means to me, though, they're going to readjust what they're doing. They're going to work more closely with the Halcon network, which are their Falcons, their Scouts, and their Lookouts to get their commodities like their drugs into the United States, because that's how you make the adjustment, or they're going to start moving it overseas, Greta. So if I was in Europe right now, if I was in Australia or New Zealand, I would be paying very close attention to the drugs moving into those countries, because the cartels have to adjust. And I'll say it again and again. This has not been a U.S.-Mexico problem for a long time. This is a global problem, and that's why we're going to be hunting them down all over the world.
Has Mexico's appetite to fight this changed with the Trump administration? I mean, they've had years where they could have fought it more.
This is the key question. What you just asked right there, that's the core. At the end of the day, it's not about giving money. It's not about giving training to the Mexican government. What is the leadership in Mexico going to allow, whether it's to allow their own forces, who, by the way, have full strength and ability to go after the cartels and crush them. The admirals in Mexico have been wanting to go after them. The generals within the Sedena forces have wanted to go after these cartels. The real key now is President Sheinbaum and the government of Mexico going to allow them to greenlight targets in that country and go after the highest levels of these cartels and all the corruption? That is the real key question here. We just don't know the answer as of yet, but I got a feeling it's not going to take very long before we begin to see some of the first operations take place down there.
Jason Jones, thank you, sir.
Good to be with you.
And now it is international lawfare that's brewing. The Mexican government is threatening to take Google to court unless Google restores the name Gulf of Mexico to Google Maps. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum is waiting to hear Google's response before Mexico actually files its lawsuit. Right now, Google Maps displays Gulf of America to its U.S.-based users, and it displays Gulf of Mexico for Google Map users in Mexico. Both names appear for Google Map users outside the United States and Mexico. Coming up, Hamas are such horrible people, just monsters. Wait till you hear the latest. Later this week, it will release 10 hostages. They are not all alive. 6 living hostages will be released on Saturday, but on Thursday, the bodies of 4 murdered hostages will first be set free. 3 of the 4 hostages are from the Bibas family. Mother Shiri, along with children named Fear and Ariel, a 4th murdered hostage, has not yet been identified. On February 1st, Shiri's husband, Yarden Bibas, and the father of the 2 boys was freed from Gaza alive. Hamas claims that the mother and young children were killed in an Israeli airstrike in November of 2023, but a Bibas family spokesperson said, quote, "Until we receive definitive confirmation, our journey is not over," end quote. Meanwhile, Hamas has also said that on Saturday they will release 6 living hostages. Those hostages are Hisham al-Sayed, age 37, Avera Mengistu, age 38, Tash Shoham, age 40, Omer Shemtov, age 22, Omer Wenkert, age 23, and Elia Cohen, age 27. The first 2 names on this list, al-Sayed and Mengistu, have been held hostage by this wicked terrorist organization for more than 10 years, while the other 4 were kidnapped on October 7, 2023. We don't know yet how many Palestinian prisoners will be exchanged for the Hamas hostages, but last Saturday, in the most recent hostage release, 369 Palestinian prisoners were freed in exchange for Hamas releasing 3 hostages. That's an average of 123 Palestinian prisoners for 1 Hamas hostage. IDF spokesperson Doron Spielman joins me. Good evening, sir. And I guess it's also notable, besides the tremendous difference in numbers between the number of Palestinians released for the Israelis held hostages and other nationalities, is the fact that the Palestinians who are being released some of them are serving multiple life sentences for murder and a bunch of horrible things, while the hostages Hamas has been holding were just living their lives, living in their kibbutz or going to a concert.
Exactly, Greta. First of all, thank you for having me. You know, I was looking at Hamas's release, and they were saying that they are going to be releasing the bodies of Shira Bibas, the prisoner, Shira Bibas, her son Ariel, who's 4 years old, and the other son, Kfir, who would be 2 years old, and they call them prisoners in exchange for prisoners. But as you said it, Shira, Kfir, and Ariel were sleeping in their home in a kibbutz. When terrorists went in, they see a mother holding these two little redheads, and they take the mother and two little children, one of which at the time was 9 months old, and they drag them into Gaza as hostages. On the other hand, the people that we're releasing are convicted killers. Hundreds of them have blood on their hands and that have been specifically identified with carrying out direct killings. So you've got terrorists on one hand, and you've got an innocent family. I mean, this is, I heard you say that, Hamas are monsters. This symbol of brutality is when we look at this mother and her two children and, the videos that we actually saw videos of when they were taken, the mother clutching her children, begging not to be taken, but Hamas are so ruthless, brought them into Gaza where it seems as if they were killed and we're only going to be giving their bodies back.
I mean, who holds, it's bad enough you kidnap, it's bad enough you murder, but who holds dead bodies and dead babies for over a year? Who does that except Hamas?
And Greta, not only who does that, we've had horrible regimes, we've had the Nazis, but they didn't film it. They weren't proud of it and showing it to the world. Hamas is proud of these videos. I mean, to really go into how deranged
I've seen the video. I've seen the GoPro on October 7th where they wore GoPros and they slaughtered people and they videotaped it. And I heard the audio where they're calling home to their mothers saying, I killed 10 Jews just by myself or 10 Israelis or something. I mean, it's the most grotesque inhumanity that you can imagine.
It is. And Greta, this is why it's clear to all of us. I'm looking at the images on the screen like everybody else, and my heart is broken over these babies and their mother and the father who came home a few weeks ago, by the way, who was filmed when he was told in custody that his family was killed. And this is why it's clear to all of us why our hearts are breaking. Our spirit cannot break because this war is not over. This war is not over.
And the people who are being released, the hundreds of Palestinians, you can't forget the fact that in a prior prisoner exchange, one of the Palestinians released was a guy named Sinwar, whose life was saved by Israeli doctors, who then went on to become the head of Hamas and who was the architect of October 7th. So the people who are being released aren't peaceniks. By any means, these are really hardened criminals in exchange for dead bodies, dead infants, people, who have been tortured for a year in some days.
Greta, you're absolutely correct. And these people are being released, just to put it in context. And I know because you've been here, they're within a few miles of every Israeli population center. And my own children, it's a true story, said to me, Abba, Dad, we're scared about these people being released because how do we know when we're driving up roads towards Jerusalem, we're not going to see these terrorists on the roads? This is a real fear of these killers being released. Could you imagine in America taking people off death row and releasing them back into your streets? These are real convicted killers. And this is why, Greta, it's clear to everybody in Israel that this war is not over. It's not over against the people that are being released now that are going to have to be brought back to justice. And it's not over regarding Gaza and Hamas and Gaza. There is no way, and I know President Trump gets this and Prime Minister Netanyahu gets this, that we can live with these absolute horrific killers that really are barely human on our border.
Yeah, I don't think they're human at all. But you talk about them on your border, and as I watch from halfway across the world, and my heart bleeds for Israel. It is also a danger, I think, to Americans because these people don't just stay in Gaza or in Israel. We see a lot of these terrorists traveling around the world. They are a risk to us all. Anyway, sir, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much, Greta.
President Donald Trump just signed an executive order expanding access to IVF, in vitro fertilization. The president also listed discoveries from Doge amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud.
Elon is, to me, a patriot. So, you could call him an employee, you could call him a consultant, you could call him whatever you want. But he's a patriot. When you look at some of the waste, fraud, and abuse that's being uncovered by Doge, and the people at Doge, these are young, often young, but super brilliant people. From 90 to 99, Social Security, 6,054,000 people. Well, that's okay. Maybe that's possible. 90 to 99, maybe it's possible. It's a lot of people, though, at that. But people that live to 100 to 109, 4,734,000. Wow, that's a lot. That means over 100 years old. There are 4 million people. I don't know too many. From 210 years old, I haven't met any of them. And if I did, I would bless them. I would worship the ground they walk on. And then you have two people from 240 years old to 249 years old, one person. And there's one person that's 360 years old. $42 million for Johns Hopkins, great place to research and drive social and behavior change in Uganda. 42 million. What about us? What about social change in our country? $20 million for fiscal federalism in Nepal. Listen to these numbers. This is all fraud.
All of this is happening as a federal judge declined to block Musk and Doge from accessing government data. Natalie Allison, reporter from the Washington Post, joins me. Nice to see you. And this IVF executive order, do you think it's a surprise to a lot of people? Because I think a lot of people thought that he was opposed to it. He said he wasn't during the campaign. But your thoughts on this today?
Well, thanks for having me, Greta. No, I don't think it's a surprise. This is certainly something that Trump was very insistent on this fall when we saw some Republicans being a little unsure about what their position should be on with regard to IVF. We certainly saw that debate unfold in Alabama. And Trump was very quick at the time to say that he's in favor of this procedure, that he would do everything he can as president to ensure that there's access to it, even as Republicans at the state level in some parts of the country were seeking to undermine it. And that set off this wave of a lot of other Republicans jumping on board. Think about folks like Katie Britt, who is the senator in Alabama, saying, she would do everything she could to protect the procedure. And she was very quick to cheer on Trump's executive order today. But I think it's worth noting that the executive order itself isn't making any initial changes. It is asking for officials in the federal government to essentially come up with a plan to lower costs. So it's seeking some ideas on how they can go about carrying out this promise Trump made to on the campaign trail. He said that he would try to make sure that everyone could get IVF free of charge if they needed to.
Any idea what the cost is? And has it been going down or been going up? Any idea?
It's unclear what exactly it would cost for the federal government to make sure that anybody who wants access to this procedure could get it. That is really a daunting task. People right now are paying out of pocket, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 sometimes for this procedure. And so it is very unaffordable for a lot of Americans. But we don't have an estimate on what exactly it would cost for the federal government to step in and ensure that this kind of procedure is something that would be affordable for Americans.
Any idea on the need or how many how many people this does involve? Because I know this is incredibly important to so many people around the country.
I think that is a number that the Trump White House is going to try to identify in this fact-finding mission, if you will. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions about the scope of this problem, about what the government could do to address it. And I think that's why we're not seeing concrete action this quickly. It's, to potentially take on something of this size, they're going to really need to have a firm grip on the facts at hand. And that's the kind of thing that people like Katie Britt have been asking the government to take up. But at this point, it's really unclear just what exactly the Trump White House is going to be able to do when they're in the business of cutting federal spending. Certainly, if they come back with a really big number of what this is going to cost, I don't know that everyone in Congress on the Republican side will get behind that.
Well, so it seems to me that the executive order is a statement of enthusiasm for IVF, and enthusiasm for expanding, and enthusiasm for getting greater access, but we don't have the details of the cost and how we're going to go about it.
Yeah, and to his credit, it certainly isn't an issue that he just let fizzle out or fade away without addressing. He did take the time to issue an executive order on this. And so presumably in the next couple of months, we'll have a report on what exactly they could do to get this ball rolling. And then, of course, it could play out